So remember the problem we had when I do it here, I get a feedback loop.
Yes, yeah.
Hello, hello. Okay. I can see an admit all button. Will I start admitting then?
Yeah. Hello, Petra. Hello, James. Hello, Zara. Hello, Pat.
Wide of a focal length, the face looks too skinny and pulled back. And if you go too tight or too narrow of a focal length, it starts to compress the face and widen it out too much. Notice Lauren's hair. Look how thin it looks at 16 millimeter, and it looks like a lion's mane at 200 millimeter. Look how long and skinny the face looks at 16 versus flat and wide at 200. Notice so if you're shooting at too wide of a focal length, the face looks too skinny and pulled back.
Hello, Anne. I see you got through now. Hello, Ale. Another 2 minutes and then we'll kick off. Pat?
Yes.
Has anybody signed up onto Vimeo? I don't know if you can see that.
I've tried there. I'm not getting through.
I'm looking at Vimeo and I see myself in it. That's all.
Okay.
Normally what we do is record all the people that come on board. And we did the last one, we actually got 3 times more people onto Vimeo than we got onto Zoom. So
Interesting, yeah.
We've already 10. So we'll give it 1 more minute and then we'll give a quick introduction. We don't want to keep the people already waiting. I'm sure people will start joining us.
Your volume is a bit low, Manoj. I think it's music, maybe.
Yeah, I was saying that earlier. Yeah. That's better.
Okay, Manoj, yeah.
Is that okay?
A little better, yes, yeah. We'll give it 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll start. Thank you.
Okay, shall I kick it off? Is that all right, or do you want to hang on a few more minutes?
I don't mind.
I don't mind.
All right, okay. Welcome everybody. We're delighted that you've been able to make it. And also to the audience who are on Vimeo. I'm not going to delay. We've got a packed agenda. I'd like to introduce you to Gavin Galler. Gavin is a well-known and seasoned property investor, podcaster, but I'll let you tell you his story. So over to you, Gavin.
Okay, thanks very much, Manoj. I can actually hear a bit of an echo at the moment. I don't know if it's gone now. That's good. I am going to turn on my slides here. Just make sure that people can see the slides, and hopefully that will be working now. You might just let me know, are you seeing this? You're on mute there, Manoj.
It's fine. Go ahead.
You can see them all right. Okay, yeah, great. I'm just I'm watching the Vimeo feed here, and I can see it's on now live as well, so I'll turn that off. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, and special thanks to Manoj for putting on this event. It's great to have somebody else do all of the work for you, and so I'll just get straight into it, shall we? The first thing I'm going to do is take you through the title, which is a bit of a mouthful: The Future of Work, the Impact on Real Estate in the COVID Era. And certainly we are in the COVID era, because as of this afternoon, I got a text from my work colleagues to tell me that one of them has actually just tested positive today and had absolutely no idea. She was completely asymptomatic. The only reason she got a test was because she was going to get a procedure done in the hospital, and as part of their procedures, they asked her to get a test, and it tested positive, and she had absolutely no clue. So she's been in the office mingling with her colleagues and no idea. So it is a kind of a scary time for us all. Today, I am going to be covering a couple of different headings, and I'll just take you through a little idea of what we're going to be covering today. Let me just see. My computer is a little bit slow. Okay, I can see now. So we're going to deal with the future of work, and I'm actually going to be talking about sort of pre-COVID and then post-COVID. I'm going to be talking about the impact on the real estate sector, and I'm going to cover the corporate real estate, which is my area, and then I'm going to go into the other areas that I'm familiar with and my predictions around that. I'm going to talk about how the sector should respond, because there's obviously a lot of stuff that we need to kind of prepare for, and there's a lot of stuff we need to react to, and then some predictions and trends that I've spotted in the last couple of months of dealing with this, followed by a Q&A for anybody who's interested in asking some questions. So let's get into it. First of all, I guess I should start with, who is this guy, and why are you listening to me? And I'm thinking to myself that it's quite a long story. I've been in this business for 25 years, but I shall shorten it down to a couple of slides. And just to begin with, I'm an investor developer in the property sector. I've been in the business 25 years now. I started out as a qualified architect, and my father died in 1993 when I was at the tender age of 21. And the family business was involved in the building of East Point Business Park. You can actually see an old aerial photograph here from back in the 90s while it was under construction. And so I kind of got thrown in the deep end, getting involved in the family business. But back then I was this sort of clueless architectural graduate. And so I decided to kind of go out and start my own architectural firm. And I was doing architecture, project management. I got into development management a little bit later. Next slide. I got a couple of years into this, having my own firm. I started to dabble in investment myself personally and development. And there might be a few people here today that recognize this in Ranelagh. I bought the Ranelagh branch from Bank of Ireland, and we completely built this brand new sort of modern building for them. And I started to invest with my clients, and I started getting into all sorts of stuff. We did residential development, we did neighborhood retail development, and then I got involved with a couple more bank buildings and bank projects. And we started to make some very good money in it was the 2005, 2006. There was a lot of money being made in the property sector. And what do you do when you've got money burning a hole in your pocket? You start looking at sort of extravagant and exotic ways to spend it. So this is a project in the south of Spain that I invested a significant sum of money in. And as you can see, it's a pretty beautiful, pristine location, marina front, and absolutely beautiful location. Unpolished gem, I used to say, but unfortunately that turned into a total disaster. And we invested in this building that you see. Basically all those arches there are all retail units. And I had it in my mind that we would create a kind of Bond Street in the sun, filled with Gucci and Armani and Ralph Lauren sort of boutique shops. And it was a great idea in theory. And then Lehman Brothers collapsed the week that we were closing the deal. And so very painful experience. Was firefighting for a couple of years, trying to kind of make the project work. But ultimately it collapsed and we lost 100% of our capital. That's not just my capital, but my investors' capital. So I could actually write a book about that entire experience and watch this space. I may well do that at some point in the near future. So we're going to go into my journey. Next, I went to the Middle East and I got involved with a friend of mine in a project in Dubai. And this is us. This is the topping out ceremony. You can see us Irish go for very lavish affairs. And this is me standing at the top of the Standard Chartered building in Dubai. And this was a really interesting project to get involved in. And it led to a number of other projects. This is on the left here, you'll see the Dubai project when it was finished. It was an 18-story building, 207,000 square feet of office and Standard Chartered Bank's sort of main headquarters. And then that project led to a project in Ghana, and the project in Ghana turned into a project in the Philippines and in India and in Indonesia. It was a very exciting time. Once we understood how this corporate sector, how they liked their buildings to be done, suddenly they were asking us to do them all over the world. But I decided that it was the Irish economy was starting to bounce back, and I decided it was time to kind of come back. So I came back to Ireland and I got an insatiable curiosity, I guess you could call it. And I started getting involved in co-working. And then I was looking at the student housing sector, which was very buoyant at the time. And I also looked at creating this kind of hybrid model where you would combine co-working and co-living with the student sector and these innovation hubs, creating innovation hubs. And that led me into prop tech and innovation in the real estate sector in general. Then we got involved. Eastpoint started coming back. The family business, we've been involved for 25 years now. This is an aerial photograph of Eastpoint not too long ago. And you can see it's quite a substantial campus. It's an office park with 37 buildings. It spans 40 acres in total. There's about 50 different corporate occupiers employing in the region of 8,000 to 9,000 staff. And so pre-COVID, I would rattle off these statistics and, those 3,500 people a day we were transporting on our shuttle service, those 2,500 cars a day coming into the car parks in the park itself, and over 1,000 cyclists a day coming in. So it's a very active management role. And we look after security, we look after the landscaping, we look after the bus service we provide, and then we look after a lot of amenities. We have a tennis court and a football pitch. We have various ponds where we can put out beanbags. And the whole idea is just to create an oasis when people are at work that they feel tremendous about being in this particular location. Obviously, dealing with 50 different occupiers gives you incredible insights into what corporate occupiers are doing. And I found this super valuable. And by combining this with what I learned in the corporate sector in Dubai, on those projects in Dubai and Africa and stuff. I combined that with what I learned in project management in prop tech and the innovation sector and stuff. And I combined it all together into, I basically started creating this Aspire model, as I call it. And that was something that I was creating for the corporate sector to understand how to build the best possible winning workplace, the most efficient and the most productive winning workplace. And so I had a book planned. I had a great title for the book and everything. And then sure enough, what happened, but along came COVID-19. And so the whole thing has kind of been turned on its head a little bit. And we're kind of on our back foot now, figuring out what is the future of work. And so that's led us to today. And I thought that probably the best thing to do is understand some of the principal drivers that were driving the workplace pre-COVID. In order to understand where the future is going, you kind of need to know pre-COVID and then responding to post-COVID. And so pre-COVID, we had a huge amount of, ultimately the corporate sector are looking for they're not looking for an office. They're looking for a productive workforce. And if they can do that without an office, they'll be happy to do it. But, a workforce needs certain things. And the agile workplace was something that everyone was talking about. The activity-based workspace was another thing. And the idea was, like, people were already working from home and coming into the office and booking a desk. So what we're talking about nowadays with COVID didn't just come about with COVID, but what happened prior to COVID was that it was slowly kind of evolving into the agile workplace. And then along came COVID. And then what we have seen is this complete shift to virtual meetings and things like that. One of the principal drivers was recruitment and retention. I was hearing all the time about the recruitment, retention, the war for talent, as they were calling it. And these guys, they were in a battle for finding the best talent. And so all of the big corporates, all of the big tech companies in particular, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, all of these companies are very much focused on finding and retaining the best talent. And that is something that then leads to their corporate culture. Corporate culture is essential in retaining, because people have to have this feeling of loyalty. And there also there's a brand and identity around buildings. And that brand includes sustainability, diversity, and inclusion. And all of this boiled down to just creating the most effective workforce and the most productive workforce. Productivity is the name of the game. So where do we go from here? As we have found, the biggest shift to work from home, this experiment that we've all been participating in for the last couple of months, none of us miss the commute. So I think from that point of view, there's definitely productivity being found by not having to commute. I think I've heard an awful lot of people saying, geez, we don't want to go back to spending hours in traffic in the morning. And so it's only natural that people have found that it is more productive working from home. Working from home should look like this. This is the dream scenario. You've got a lovely kitchen, or a workspace. It's lovely and neat and tidy. There's no dirty dishes in the sink. Everything is perfect. But I think the reality a lot of people have found is that they're still in their pajamas, waking up, working on projects and things like that. So it is not for everybody. The work from home that everyone talks about, I've spoken to a lot of different occupiers, and I've spoken to a lot of different staff and workers, and some of them totally love it. Work from home is the way they'd love to work for the rest of their life. Other people, it's the complete opposite. They cannot wait to get back to work. They cannot wait to get back to the office. And I've heard people, their offices talking about going to a work from home only model, and staff are actually talking about finding another job because they're not interested in. Obviously, with work from home comes distractions, comes spatial issues. If you and your partner are both working, then working from home can be a problem, especially if you have spatial issues. If you're both trying to work from the kitchen, if you don't have a sort of a dedicated workspace, then it's a challenge. And so a lot of people have been coming into the office for that purpose. Also, we can't forget the fact that there is an isolation issue. Social isolation is a bit of a problem. And we have had a lot of people kind of talking about mental health lately. Before I go into the post-COVID future of work, and I thought it would be important to just cover some of the drivers for actually the workplace. And there's the 4 C's. One of the reasons why people are interested in the workplace is because you get the 4 C's from the workplace. You've got communication, you've got concentration, and by that I mean you can concentrate on your work. Communication, management and staff can communicate very well. You've got collaboration opportunities, and then you've got, most important, is community. And what I found in the last couple of months is that the first 2, communication and concentration, actually work fine from home. You can communicate now fine. The virtual meetings are working very well. And the work from home experiment, as I mentioned, has proven that there's no question you can work from home. You can communicate with your workforce, and you can communicate, through virtual meetings and stuff. And concentration in many ways has actually been better at home. You're not in a busy workspace, then you can probably find that a quiet kitchen or a quiet coffee shop is just as effective as working in an office. However, it's the 3rd and 4th that are the problem area. And what corporates are saying to me now is that collaboration has suffered. Things like innovation and creativity, those kind of things are not great in a work from home environment. And community is another area. I'm hearing a lot of stories about people just wanting to get back to sort of hang out with their work colleagues. And so this is another thing that is suffering in the work from home situation. So what does it mean for the workplace? Well, I think the reality is work from home is here to stay, but I do think that what we're going to see is a kind of a combination, a hybrid model, where you're going to have probably people working two days a week, maybe 3 days a week at home, and then coming into the office for catching up with your mates, going into collaborative meetings, having all these kind of social interactions. That is very important. And there's a huge amount of stuff that actually is missed from the office. There's learning opportunities. Young people suffer in the work from home because they're not exposed to management and senior personnel. They're not exposed to those kind of organic interactions that happen. And so I think we're going to probably see a reconfiguration of the office space, and we may also see a move to regional. By that I mean flex office and stuff. People will not necessarily want to make large commutes, but if they can find, say, a local area flex office or a business center, that is something that I do think is actually going to be valuable. And but ultimately, we got to remember those principal drivers, and that is productivity is number one. How we do that, the recruitment and retention is going to continue to be an important aspect, and corporate culture and brand and identity is definitely going to be part of that picture. So getting into the impact on real estate, and yeah, it's there's a lot of journalists. The journalists have spoken, and they've come out and they've said that the office is dead, and there's a huge amount of opinion out there on what it means for the future of work. And there's been a lot of negative headlines, but I do think that I'm starting to see more nuanced stuff now. And I think, you're seeing things like that the office is evolving and that it's convalescing. And but there is no doubt there has been some damage done to the sector. I've seen a report there from KPMG, and KPMG came out and said that 72% of large corporate CEOs have found that work from home has actually widened their talent pool. And if we go back to the previous comment on recruitment and retention, that is actually a big plus. And also 68% of those same CEOs are now planning to reduce their office footprint. So these are concerning statistics for the sector. And I do think we're going to see a couple of rough years. And definitely the COVID-19 lockdowns have been brutal. And I don't know if anyone remembers this movie with Cillian Murphy, but he wakes up after a 28-day coma, and literally walking the streets of Dublin back during the lockdown was a little bit reminiscent of that. Here's an aerial photograph of East Point during the lockdown, and you can see car parks pretty much empty, only a couple of critical staff in. And so, you know, the area of, I mean, we have mostly multinationals in East Point, so it has been different. A lot of them are technology companies that can work from home, and so the vast majority of their workforce are working from home. What we're seeing, though, in the wider sector is, in just the corporate real estate sector, is there's definitely a drive to lower costs, and I've seen a push for the lowering of rent. I've seen a push for service charges to be brought down, and I've seen estate charges to be brought down. But it is very sector dependent. And by that, I mean that you've got in the, you know, even in our business park, but across the entire sort of work sector, you've got some of the industries are struggling and some of them are thriving. So I've seen, you know, industries, say in hospitality and the airline sector, they are really struggling, and they're finding it a real battle. But then at the same time, you've got companies that do, say, online gaming and things like that, that are actually thriving, and their share prices are shooting up. And so you've got this kind of very different balance between the two. And now, by having said that, that does not stop the guys that are thriving and seeing their share price asking for a pay cut or a rent cut. And we've actually seen that. And even though their shareholders are getting a nice big fat dividend every quarter, they're still looking for cuts. And so you have to be very wary of that kind of stuff. We are anticipating an increase in the vacancy rate. Tenants will exercise breaks. Space that is out for sublet will probably sit there for a period of time. And in recent pricing that we've seen deals out there where there have been price pressure, and there's been chipping up prices. And this is all going to push and make it a bit more difficult for all of us. In terms of other sectors, the retail and high street, that is obviously under huge pressure. The shift to online shopping and things like that has been coming for a decade, and definitely work from home is not going to make this any easier. You've now got so many people working from home that they are not going into the central business district, and if they're not in the central business district, they're not going to be, you know, going to cafes, they're not going to be going to restaurants, and so there's definitely going to be a struggle there, I believe. And if you look at the hospitality sector, I think the hospitality sector is going to bounce back when COVID bounces back, when the solution to COVID has arrived. But I do think that the food and beverage sector, after COVID has been sort of fixed, may still suffer in the central business districts where they were relying on the lunchtime crowd from the corporate sector. So people going out at lunchtime. If you've got a huge amount of people deciding to work from home, that could well impact the high street and the food and beverage sector. Obviously, logistics doing very well, set to grow further. Again, online shopping, and there's that whole balance again. You've got online shopping damaging the retail sector, but being a boom to the logistics sector. And also, I think one of the things that we're going to see is that supply chain, the fact that we have seen this interruption of the supply chain brought about by COVID-19, I do think that national critical logistics and things like that are going to be brought home, and they're not going to rely on this just in time and international transport. I think a lot of critical needs, the idea of PPE being, you know, airlines having to bring in PPE and waiting for ships to dock, that is possibly going to move to a critical infrastructure and critical stockpiling. And so you might see additional needs for logistics and warehousing. Residential, I mean, in recent weeks, we've seen residential on a bit of a tear, and it's been doing very well. You have to question the drivers behind this. There's obviously supply and demand issues in the Irish market, and in other markets, there is a lot of pent-up demand that the lockdown obviously caused. And you had, 7 or 8 weeks of purchasers that would normally be out there buying in the market that were unable to do anything and sitting on their hands. And so they have gone out there and started trying to buy and catch up. And that's had a bit of an impact on price, and you've seen some pushing up of the prices. But you've got to understand, obviously, there is also, there's a lot of people who have lost their jobs. A lot of people have been furloughed. And when all of that stuff happens, it does definitely lead to price pressure. I think we're going to see possibly a bit of a lag in the market, and then you might see it starts to fall. And but it's important to remember that 9/11, it's almost 20 years ago now, so it's easy for you to forget these things. But you do not, if you just think about what happened after 9/11, the airline industry, the travel industry ground to a halt for several months. And you had corporates in New York City all moving to New Jersey at the time. And basically, the whole market kind of got twisted up, and it wasn't long that people started flying again. I can remember going to Dublin Airport not long after 9/11, and not long after these inspections to check that traveling through the security systems were, and there was queues around the airport, and all of that became more efficient. So memories fade, and I think people start to travel again. And I do think the market will return, but there are some inbuilt changes that have happened in the market that are going to I just think that there's some stability in the market that has always been there, and that's going to continue, but there will be some changes. And so we have to look at how the sector should respond on that basis. And one of the things that definitely we have to kind of bear in mind is that budget today. This is the headline in today's newspaper. Those numbers are pretty mind-boggling. And anybody who is in doubt that there is kind of a major recession on the horizon, I think, is deluding themselves. Now, hopefully all of this money, this 40 billion that's being borrowed to protect the economy, I'm hoping that stimulus will stave off a longer term depression. But I think it's beyond doubt that there's going to be some sort of a downturn, and we're all just going to have to look at how we can survive that. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of firefighting in the months ahead. I think we haven't seen anything yet. All of the stimulus that's been out there has kept things going, and hopefully that keeps things going. But there's going to be, I saw this in 2008, and there's always a property lag. There's this time when you don't see the prices. And, in 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and immediately there was this huge collapse in the stock market and all these things. But it was actually 2012 before the Irish market hit the bottom. And so that's something to bear in mind. But it's also important to remember that what is a threat for somebody is an opportunity for somebody else. And so over the next while, I think we need to remember that point. And some of the things that we can probably do to counteract what's happened is remember that certainly in the corporate real estate sector, you've got to remember that collaboration and community that I mentioned before, that is super important. And I think if we focus on that area, you're going to start to find, and one of the areas is obviously flexible solutions. And if you look at this slide behind here, that is a company called Industrious in New York City. They provide these spaces for people to work at. And I can see more of this kind of space being attractive for bringing in people and trying to get them to use an office for the social aspects and the community building aspects. And of course, then there's the whole collaboration side as well. Flexibility, hospitality, enhanced services. By that I mean, the ability to bring in food and those kind of services so that people don't have to go and do anything. They can just basically come to the office and a lot of stuff is brought for them. And I think you do need to be very proactive and adaptable going forward if you're going to survive this. Let's look at some predictions, and I've been looking at various things that are happening in the market. Definitely the focus on wellness. That this is a great photograph. But by wellness, I think I mean a little bit more than that. We've seen a huge shift in our office buildings, and what people are looking for is perks that I would say, the likes of an office gym. This is a meditation room or yoga room that is in one of the buildings that I'm familiar with here in East Point. And there's the wellness area also covers things like air quality, things like water quality. Touchless entry is obviously going to be an important aspect with COVID-19 now. And as I was already saying before, prop tech and IoT, or the Internet of Things, you've got sensors, all of that is becoming critically important. Biophilia and nature is another area that I think is going to be a big point of it. Bringing people, like if people are going to come in from their home, they need to feel a certain wellness when they're in the office. And this has been something that there's been a shift to before COVID. And I think after COVID, it is going to be part of that whole wellness focus. And don't forget, ultimately, it's about boosting the corporate culture, the loyalty, and the social kind of glue that ties together the entire office and the workforce. The regional flex space that I mentioned earlier, I do think that the commute that people are trying to push away from is good, and you can gain a couple of hours a day by not having to commute. But as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't work for everybody. You're going to have a situation in many cases where people are working from home in poor conditions. They're going to either have, say, flatmates that they have to share a kitchen table with, or they're going to have to work with their partner. They might have to stagger times during the day. They might also have childcare issues. I mean, it's all fine and well to say, well, it's good that the schools are back, but for many people, their children only go to Montessori or something like that. And that would mean that they're gone from 9 till 12. That's only 3 hours, and you're still trying to work for the rest of the day. So having access to flex space near to your home, so you don't have to go too far from the office. I've already heard a number of our occupiers talking about that, and rather than it being a branded space that they have themselves, that they may look to get membership in places like this. Also a feeling of calm that you get from working in a place like this that you may not get from working in at your home. There's distractions, there's all sorts of stuff I found when I worked from home during lockdown. One of the things that I found was that working in the kitchen, first of all, your kids come running in and want to play and things like that, which is hard to say no to when you're working at home. But the other aspect is the sole distraction. When you're home, you can't but miss things like, I've got to kind of mow the garden lawn, that squeaky door handle, better get that fixed. And there's a constant distraction from working from home, as I found anyway. Obviously, it's different if you've got your own dedicated workspace or studio or an office, and that's something that also goes to something that I think the work from home space. I think real estate developers in the residential sector should start thinking about the fact that if there's a move to work from home, creating areas if the home that you can actually turn into an office, a home office. That is going to be something that I think becomes quite popular, and it's an area that, I don't know, I mean, just the ability to work from home, the ability to communicate at home, it's all there, but you got to make it as easy as possible. And so I do think that developers that create spaces like, extra bedrooms, instead of it being a bedroom, kitted out with Wi-Fi, kitted out with maybe the Cat5 connection in the wall so you can get high-speed internet. All of that's going to be important for people working from home. And it also goes to talking about apartment developers. They need to start thinking about that as well. An area that I've seen a big move to is bicycles. We are in the park here in East Point, putting in a lot more bike shelters. And one of the issues we've seen is a huge uptick in the number of people using scooters. And it's a bit of a problem for the occupiers because people don't want to leave them out in the rain, so they got to bring them in. and they got to bring them in and put them under their desk, all this kind of stuff. So creating space for storage of bikes and scooters is an issue, particularly in the central business district. In some of the offices that I'm involved in, we've seen that people are bringing in their bicycles and they're leaving it in the escape stairs. And of course, that is actually a fire hazard. So that becomes a problem. And there is going to be a continued focus on sustainability. Now, that the return post-COVID, I think this is going to return with a vengeance. And if there's anything that we've learned from COVID-19, it is that the warnings that you get from the scientists for years and years actually turn out to be sensible and something that we should have been listening to. 5 years ago, I remember this talk that Bill Gates gave about the risk of a flu or an airborne respiratory virus. He talked about it. Barack Obama mentioned the fact that we needed to kind of put infrastructure in place. Everybody ignored it, and here it comes along. And if we had not ignored that 5 years ago, if we had started making the investment, of course, at the time, it looks very expensive and unnecessary. But if we had done that, then today we wouldn't be spending the 40 billion that we're having to spend on the economy to get this fixed. And so that is something to bear in mind. Also, we have to think about the future. One of the things that I'm very conscious of is that the actual real estate sector represents 40% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And that puts a huge target on our back. And by that, I mean the industry's back. We are an industry that produces a huge amount of the emissions. And we now have all of these governments that have got to somehow get back all of this money that they've had to spend on COVID. So if you're going to get into carbon emissions and things like that, that is an area that is going to become very, very target rich in terms of taxation. And I do think that our sector is very much in line now for targeting for that kind of thing. As Larry Fink of BlackRock, which is the largest investment manager in the world with 6 trillion under management, he recently wrote to all of the CEOs of his clients and stuff. And he said that climate risk is investment risk. And one thing to remember is if the big money is now focused on climate risk being investment risk, then it means that our buildings have got to be as greenhouse gas emission friendly and sustainable as possible. Thank you. That's the end of my talk. If you guys would like to learn more, I would suggest that you go to my website, gavinjgallagher.com/go will actually bring you to my newsletter sign up. If you want to connect with me on social media, Gavin J. Gallagher is my handle that I use for everything. And I do wanted to just point you to my podcast. This is my podcast. I found that during lockdown, when I decided that I was no longer going to be publishing a book about the winning workplace, I shifted to producing an online podcast, and I talk about my various thoughts and property investment, real estate innovation, things of that nature, and impact. And by impact, I mean what we were talking about a moment ago, greenhouse gases, the environment, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I understand anybody who would like to get a copy of these slides, if you sign up to my newsletter, again, just go to the website there, Gavin J. Gallagher. Obviously, don't forget the J for James, and go /go, and that'll bring you straight to the newsletter sign up. And if you're on the newsletter, I will be forwarding this slide deck to everybody on my email list. And so I'm going to hand back now to Manoj, if you want to go and bring in any questions and answers that are out there.
Yeah.
Let me just stop.
Get some questions from the audience. Guys, can I ask you to show up your faces now? Because I'm sure Gavin would appreciate seeing who he's talking to. Hello, John. John is in PropTech. John, would you like to pop a question? Can't hear you, John.
You're on mute, John.
So I'm going to unmute myself to be a start. I have a property data analytics platform, a real estate one, I suppose, and we're looking at the expanding out into different markets as well. How different was the markets like Ghana and Dubai compared to, I suppose, Ireland for you?
John, it was really, really interesting. One of the reasons that I mentioned I started looking at co-working and things like that was actually while I was in Ghana, I remember I was going to get a SIM card so that I could use my phone, my smartphone, while I was there. And I went to this place that sold SIM cards. It was like a Vodafone store or something like that. And it was the only place in the whole area that actually had free Wi-Fi. And I remember seeing hundreds of young Ghanaian entrepreneurs sitting around outside on the steps trying to get it connected to the internet. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is fascinating to see just the kind of the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well in Africa. And but then what I also saw when I went inside the actual building where to buy my SIM card, I found that we had all these kind of makeshift offices set up, and they weren't like good quality offices. They were basically like a cubicle that you'd see in a toilet where you could actually look in over. And that was somebody, they were paying $400 a month for access to basically like a cubicle that you could look over. So there was no privacy at all. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, co-working in somewhere like Ghana is going to be, if you were to produce an area that does that kind of thing. And then obviously technology now has completely opened that up even further. So I definitely think the likes of Africa and places like that are absolutely the future in terms of growth and things of that nature. And if you look at the growth forecasts for the next 30 to 50 years for cities, it's actually incredible that the top 30 cities in the world are going to be in Africa and India. China is not even going to feature in the top 37 countries as top cities in the world. So it is quite fascinating when you look at that. So definitely, I'm a big fan of places like Africa and the developing world. I can see there's a couple of chats. I wonder if this, will the recording be available? Manoj, I believe so, yeah.
So, Peter, would you like to ask a question?
Sorry, I see somebody's asked, what do I mean by prop tech several times? So prop tech it's actually a term that's come out, and property technology. And so I discovered this around about 2006, that there was a word called property technology, and it's been shortened to prop tech, and it's become quite the buzzword out there. So if you type prop tech in now, you'll actually see that there are venture capital firms in the US that have been set up specifically targeting prop tech. One of the things that, one of the ways I look at it is if you look at the financial sector, 10 years ago, we were all talking about the big banks, and you couldn't make a dent in there. You couldn't get near them. They were just so dominant. And then suddenly now the big banks are all, worried, about their futures, because along have come all of these fintech companies, and the fintech companies have taken over. They've created these really agile, nimble little apps. I mean, Revolut on my phone is fantastic. It doesn't charge any of the charges that my banks charge. So I do a lot of my business now across Revolut. And the very same thing, if you look at the real estate sector, it is one of the largest sectors. It is one of the greatest storers of wealth in the world. And if you're in a sector that is got that much capital tied up in it, it makes for a massive, massive area of disruption. But of course, like fintech, it takes time for the sector to start to get disrupted. And in the same way the banks took a while to get disrupted, real estate is going to be disrupted, and it has begun now. And so for the last 4 years, I've been watching as small little startups suddenly become quite dominant in sectors and doing things like, for example, we're talking about the agile workplace. So, so many people now are coming to work and they're deciding to work from home half the time and coming to work the other half of the time. And so what's possible is offices can actually have, say, 100 staff, but only 50 desks. And instead of worrying about the fact that you've got, you've got 100 staff, what if they all show up? Well, now there's an app on your phone, you can just book a desk. And so that is no longer a risk. And so that's the kind of technology companies that are coming out there. And there's huge other areas. There's areas where maintenance and all that is starting to become a huge area that can be disrupted because it can be done using augmented reality. You can, there's all sorts of smartphone devices now where you can actually do an awful lot of repair, and you can log repairs and stuff using your phone. So that's what I mean by prop tech. It is innovation and apps and technology that can basically make more efficient the processes that are typically in the real estate sector. And I think every aspect of real estate could be disrupted because of that. Hope that answers the question. Developing technology solutions, space as a service. Yeah, space as a service is a huge area. We have seen the likes of WeWork, and obviously WeWork is known for its, implosion in terms of a big IPO last year. But actually, as a product market fit, WeWork has done very, very well, and it's been very popular. And I actually think it'll probably become more popular now that we have all of these big companies that are now in this time of uncertainty in terms of their workforce. You've got large companies with hundreds of staff, thousands of staff in some cases, and they have got, multiple buildings, millions of square feet across the world rented, and these are on long-term rents. And now that everyone's working from home, they're starting to reevaluate, and they're starting to look at the fact that you could have a temporary model where you could say, you know what, I'm going to go back to that example I gave of 50 desks for the 100 people. I've spoken to banks in the world of real estate, and what they would typically have is 100 desks for 100 members of staff. And every desk needs so many square feet of office, and you need so many meeting rooms around that and stuff. But they're moving now to the more agile model where they might decide to take over just 80 desks per 100 staff. And then they'll expect people to book a desk using their apps and stuff. And then they did an audit on this, and they found that 70% of their staff are out of the are in the office, and 30% are out and about. They're either working from home, or they're out sick, or they're on vacation, or they're at meetings. And so they decided, we can actually go further with our agile workplace. And so what they've started looking at now is moving to 60 desks per 100 staff. And what they do then is they supplement that with an additional 20 that might be in the likes of a WeWork or something like that. And that's just a way of, and now that we're in this bigger shift with COVID-19, I think that could actually become even greater. And you might see a greater number of people looking for that kind of solution with WeWork, where there isn't a long-term commitment. You're not talking about a 10-year lease or a 15-year lease. You're talking about a 3-month commitment and no more than that. And you can basically decide, right, I'm going to remove 150 desks tomorrow morning, and that's it. You've just reduced your costs without having to wait for break clauses to emerge in leases and things of that nature.
Any other questions? Put your hand up if you have a question. Xinglang, hello, do you have a question? You only just unmute. Any other questions? Go ahead, Pat.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Pat.
Yeah, I was interested to hear you talking about 9/11 and our recession, even in 2008 and whatever. We've even, that's even gone into the distant memory, you could say, people forgetting about Anglo and all these things,
Yeah.
So these people haven't experienced a recession. Some of these very young people, and these things will pass, as they say, But
It's true. And one of the reasons I started my podcast is because it was primarily because of that. I mean, I went through 2008 and I was, I was kind of firing on all cylinders in 2007. I had a huge amount of money borrowed. I ended up with a lot of headaches with banks chasing me for money. And like, obviously your portfolio in that situation collapses. And so it puts a huge amount of strain on your mind and things like that. So I found that, I found ways to deal with that, and I built a resilience so that, but I did see, some, people that I was friendly with and members of my own family actually took their own lives from the stress and strain of it all. And so I started my podcast to actually get it out there, what people can expect, and I developed a couple of strategies for dealing with all that kind of stuff. And so the purpose of the podcast is to just talk about my experiences, both positive and negative. I go into a lot of the negatives actually, because I find those are probably the greatest learning experiences. And so, yeah, you should check the podcast out if you have any of those kind of, wondering about what's likely to happen now that banks are getting a little bit more difficult, and what to expect, and how your mindset needs to be attuned to this. Because I believe there's going to be a couple of months next year, or in the next while, and it's going to become very difficult, and people need to be prepared for that, prepared for how they're going to react to it, and also just learn to read the market. Because what happens is there's a moment of capitulation where people are fighting. They're in denial, first of all, then they're fighting with their banks to try to kind of save themselves. And then there's a point when they give up, and that is when you'll see prices drop and distress creeps into the market. But a lot of people are out there thinking now's the time to buy. And I don't think prices have even really dropped yet. I don't think we've seen anything yet. So, but I think you do need to be resilient, because everyone who's in real estate is going to see their I've always described it as a bicycle wheel. And at some point you're at the top of the bicycle wheel when you're doing great and everything is flying. And then the market goes down and you'll be at the bottom. And it's not something that can be avoided. A lot of young people that I've seen, they get into this mindset that I'm making some great money and it's going to continue on. And I was in that same mindset for a period of time. And you think nothing can go wrong. And then sure enough, a couple of months later, you find yourself in great difficulty. And so it's getting your mindset ready for that. And so I go into a lot of that in the podcast.
I think it would be great if you also amplified about the valuation. I mean, I think real estate globally is worth about 230 trillion.
Yeah.
Total gold is 7.5. Total stocks and shares, even now, is only about 100 trillion.
And that's it. Yeah. The real estate market is the greatest storage of wealth. By a factor of, several factors. I mean, the gold industry, as you say, is just worth 6 or 7 trillion. Real estate is worth plus 200 trillion. And so that is one of the reasons why there is now this massive shift towards the disruption of real estate and the construction industry as well. Everybody is starting to think, how can we disrupt? How can we make it more efficient? And I've actually brought a number of guests onto my podcast where I talk to them about that. And I'll be speaking to the head of one of the largest venture capital firms that are actually focused on prop tech in the next couple of weeks on the podcast. And so it's renovate. I see there's a question here about what do I see happening with existing properties. Yeah, I do think there's going to be repurposing. But it's going to depend. I mean, a lot of stuff, it's, people sort of say, oh, well, office buildings will just be turned into residential buildings, but there's a huge amount of work to do that. And so sometimes the best thing you can do is just demolish the building altogether, because to get pipes into, if you look at the structure of you just look at the design, take the floor plans of an office building and take the floor plans of a apartment building, they're very, very different. And so it's not always that easy, but definitely there will be renovation projects to be done and the repurposing. I mean, the retail market. The high street retail, I think, is an area that is really going to come under focus, because a huge number of stores are going to close, and what's going to happen to all that space. And I think it's a really, you've got to, again, it's down to the mindset. You've got to think about the future as either a threat or an opportunity. If you're heavily borrowed and you've got a lot of property on your books with a lot of borrowing, this is a big threat to you. But if you're in a different position, if you're an investor who has not yet put money into the real estate market, then the next couple of months could be very valuable, very lucrative, because you're going to be able to pick up bargains, I think, at some point in the near future. I can remember in 2009 or 2010 seeing property, prime real estate here in Dublin, and you could buy it at a yield of 25%. And so with it, German funds were coming in, buying these, and within 4 years, the entire investment was repaid. And whereas 4 or 5 years before that, you were looking at people on Grafton Street paying 1.5% yield. So it would take 75 years or 50 years for the recovery of their investment. And it just shows you the timing is everything. 75 years versus 4 years repayment of your capital.
Any other questions, guys? Well, I think Gavin needs a big applause.
Thanks, guys. I can see a lot of people on mute, so I'll assume that there's a huge applause happening there.
Okay.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or wherever. I'm on LinkedIn, Gavin J. Gallagher, and I'd be delighted to answer any specific questions anybody has. And by all means, tune in to the podcast Behind the Facade. And I actually have a Facebook group as well that's dedicated to the podcast. And what we have is a lot of people joining up to that so that they can kind of share ideas and interact with me. And I usually do a weekly video in there. So if anyone's interested in that, it's called Behind the Facade Community over on Facebook.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gavin. I'm sure your little one is waiting for you. And
yeah, I'm looking forward to getting home.
So thank you very much for sparing the time. It's been awesome.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you very much.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks a million,
Enjoyed
guys.
it. Very good.
Thanks.
Delighted.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Oh, how do we get?
Thanks very much, everyone.
See you, Manoj.